Madam Clerk, can we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Vincent Howell,
Here.
Councilor David G. Romero,
Here.
Councilor Barbara Casey,
Here.
Councilor David A. Ulibarri Jr.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Pledge of allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Silence.
A moment of silence for all the residents in Las Vegas, the homeless people, to make sure that they're keeping warm and they're eating, and to all the people that we lost in a few months, neighbors and friends. Keep them in the prayers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Howell, members of the council. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
Let's say we, councilors?
Mayor Howell, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilor Romero,
Yes.
Councilor Ulibarri Jr.,
Yes.
Councilor Casey.
Yes.
I have a motion by Councilor Casey, a second by Councilor Ulibarri Jr. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Howell. The next item on the agenda is the public input. We have Mr. Arthur Gallegos on the SECA remand. Mr. Gallegos.
Thank you for allowing me to address you once again. I'm very optimistic that at long last we may be able to come to a water sharing agreement. And I can't help but think about and worry about why this has failed in the past. And I am convinced that it was because the city council was kept out of the loop in a surreptitious manner. And I'm really here to urge you to stay informed about the proceedings regarding doing away with the 1835 and ending the litigation, because I'm afraid it's going to be delegated again. I have confidence in Ms. Galvari, but I am convinced that the many years that this has failed, it's because the prior administration has presented a notion to you, and then he had his utilities director back it up, and then D.L. Sanders and Rebecca Dempsey warned you about the litigation involved. And it was different, but it was always the same. It kept the council from moving forward and ending the litigation. I had also seen how other communities, without exception, really support the acequias. And I don't think a rational mind could think that the city government over the years has done nothing based on their behavior but to exterminate the acequias and make it so difficult for us. Case in point, we had money that we had grants from the Department of Agriculture, and our tax dollars were used to pay billable hours to Rebecca Dempsey under the direction of the prior administration to speak before the fiscal agent, Las Cruces, to deny the acequias the money that they needed for infrastructure, for legal fees, and to keep the acequias going. And that's just one example of the series of behaviors that the prior administration and the council has demonstrated in trying to kill and exterminate the acequias. I'm hopeful that we have different personalities and that the motives are different. And notwithstanding the misappropriation of funds, I really encourage you to look over the years of the millions that we have given 2 or 3 individuals at Story Project for water we've never used. It's a lease agreement, it's a storage agreement, it's this, it's that, and they always have an evaporation clause. And 8 vertical feet of water evaporates from Story Project every year. And it just so happens that it's all water that gets evaporated. So it creates a situation where we got to give them more millions. Conservatively, it's been 10 million. It may be as much as 13 or 12 that tax dollars have been spent for water agreements with Story Project for water we've never used or ever needed. I just, in terms of closure, I really would like the council to stay involved and not delegate the water sharing agreement without keeping an ear to the ground about what's actually going on. And I'm convinced that if that had happened in the past, we wouldn't be here with the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the input.
Thank you, Mr. Gallegos. The next person on public input is Mr. Gabe Estrada on the Acequia remand. Mr. Estrada.
Good evening, Mr. Estrada.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm going to be very brief and very short. We hadn't had this opportunity to get together, and I'm really proud that we're here today. I hope this is the first step into a very successful trip to get our remand together. I had such a good feeling when we talked to the judge and the order he gave that we get together, the council and the Acequias, and try to work out the agreement. He's given us extensions to get together because he feels we can come together, and like we said the last time we were here, we're that close to coming together. And today I hope we're here with open minds and a positive attitude that we can serve the citizens of our country and our state and use our water beneficially to the best use. I'm going to cut it short because we have a presentation, I think, that will outdo what I would say. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Estrada. That concludes our public input.
Thank
Mayor
you.
Howell, the next item on the agenda is business items. The first item is the approval, disapproval of Resolution 20-05, acknowledging additional liability of debt in the amount of $3,808,000 plus any amount remaining in the existing repayment agreement from non-federal sources. Approximately 30 days ago, Mayor Howell and Councilor Romero met with the HUD staffing, both from Albuquerque as well as from Houston. They delivered a letter and an assessment report that was delivered to each and every one of you. And in that letter, it indicated that we had 30 days to provide a resolution to the HUD Albuquerque office to acknowledge the debt of the $3,808,000 that they have assessed the city of Las Vegas for demolition of homes that occurred in 2004. I have included a copy of the resolution 20-05 with HUD recommendations for the resolution and acknowledgement of the liability, and I will entertain any questions.
Before you do that, Madam Clerk, can you read the resolution, please, to the audience?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, and this is the amended resolution? Yes, ma'am. State of New Mexico Municipality of City of Las Vegas Resolution Number 20-05, 2019-2020, Acknowledgement of Liability and Financial Assessment. Whereas the governing body in and for the municipality of the City of Las Vegas, State of New Mexico, hereby acknowledges the Housing and Urban Development HUD Quality Assurance Subsystem QASS report detailing the sale of properties covered by the annual contributions contact ACC to ineligible buyers in violation of HUD requirements
and the unsold units that remain offline and in disrepair. And whereas the city must restore $3,808,000 plus any amount remaining in the existing repayment agreement to its low-rent public housing program, and all contributions must be made from non-federal sources. And whereas the city must immediately correct all books of account to properly record a contingent liability in the amount of $3,808,000 to conform to the requirements of the ACC and GAAP accounting standards. And whereas the city must recognize that the amounts repaid are considered federal funds and are restricted to eligible uses under the low rent public housing rules and regulations. And now therefore be it hereby resolved that the governing body of the municipality of the city of Las Vegas, state of New Mexico, hereby acknowledges its liability.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Certainly.
I'd like to open it up for questions. Councilors?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Casey?
I really have a problem with the opening statement because this council did not have anything to do with the illegal sale of those houses. And so I will not vote for this unless we can add the date of the illegal sale when that took place, so that whoever reads this knows that it was not this governing body that was responsible for the illegal sale of houses. It was a previous governing body that did it. That's one thing. The next thing is there is nothing in the resolution that states what are the terms of the new agreement. Do we, you know, I think at the last meeting you mentioned, Mrs. Interim Manager, that we would have to pay the money back within a 5 to 10 year period.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have that in writing from them so that we can add it here and what those terms are going to be, how much we have to pay?
The first order of business, thank you, Counselor. The first order of business is to accept the liability. That's within a 30-day period. The City of Las Vegas should and will accept, we should accept the liability of the $3,808,000. Thereafter, we meet with HUD once again to work out that repayment agreement that is both workable with the City of Las Vegas as well as with HUD. And that will come at a later date. As I said, the first order of business is acknowledging the liability. And I did work with the city attorney, and do you want to go through that one change that we acknowledged, that this occurred in the 2004 fiscal year, and so we thought that we would go ahead and insert it, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Montoya.
Councilor, members of the council, the default first occurred in 2004 when the city diverted federal assets from its home ownership program. In light of that, we recommend inserting in the opening paragraph, following quality assurance subsystem, report detailing the sale of properties covered by the ACC to ineligible buyers in the year 2004 in violation of HUD requirements. So if we insert the year there.
Okay. And we need to correct the word contact to contract on that same line. Minor contributions contract, it says contact right here.
Yes.
Okay, and then the other question that I have, thank you, Mrs. McClure. What are the terms of what's the remaining amount that we still owe of the $422,000 or whatever that we have not paid? And should that be included in the resolution?
It is included. It is included in the first whereas. It says the city must restore $3,808,000 plus any amount remaining in the existing repayment agreement.
We don't know what that amount is?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay.
We have, and I'll let I'll let Ms. Vega, the balance is $255,426 on June 30th, 2019.
Okay.
Is what it is. So that would be the balance that we currently owe of the 400,000 that we had initially signed the repayment agreements. It would be $255,426 by June 30th, 2019. By June 30th of 2020, we would be down to $90,000. So we have been paying it at $150,000 a year for the last 2 years, and we have with an additional 15,000. So that gives us a balance of another $90,000 in addition to the $3,808,000.
So can we put that amount in here, so that it reads, the city must restore $3,808,000 plus $255,426
It would be
remaining, or whatever it'll be at that.
It would actually be 90, what did we say?
90,456.
90,000 for, plus 90,425 that we would owe on the existing repayment agreement.
Okay, so can we put that in there?
Yes, sure.
And that would be, excuse me, that would be as of June 30th of this year?
Yes, sir. Yes,
I
sir.
think
We can
that
certainly
makes it
include that.
Pretty clear, so that later on they'll say, oh, well, you know, it's really more than that, or whatever.
And I believe that once we, if we acknowledge the liability that we hope to do this evening, HUD will come back to the council and possibly acknowledge the debt and actually have us prepare another resolution on the repayment agreement plans as well.
Okay.
And that would be something that would be negotiated between the two, between the council and, of course, HUD, the HUD office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Romero?
And I know Councilor Casey brought this up, but I don't know if, I agree with her as far as, adding when the sales were, but if I remember correctly, the sale was in 2001 and the proceeds were 2004 that we used incorrectly? Is that more detail?
The debt was actually incurred in 2004. Am I correct? Yes, correct.
But the sale was, this one was 2001.
It was in 2004, that was the ineligible homeownership program sales. So it could have, it could have occurred, but in 2004, that's when they acknowledged the ineligible sales of the homes that were done.
Okay, I just think more detail into that statement would be more beneficial. I don't know how the rest of you feel. Okay, one of my other questions was as far as the repayment plan. You
Yes.
mentioned on the repayment plan what we owe now. Didn't you, if I remember correctly, back in December, you said there was a payment, I think, done in November, was it December, of 50,000? That's,
We, initially in 2017, in 2019 rather, we paid $171,634, I think, to bring it up current, because we were behind, we were lacking 11,683. And all of the, so at June 30th, 2019, it was brought up current, and we paid an additional $150,000 that the repayment agreement that was signed off on did not call for. So that's,
so for the updated balance of the 90,000 that you said,
that would be
so if we acknowledge that now, wouldn't we have to do a budget adjustment before we acknowledge that, or?
No, because we're acknowledging that we still owe 90,425, and that'll be repaid in fiscal year 2021, which will be next year. We'll budget $90,425. Plus, of course, we'll also be coming back to Mayor and Council with a payment agreement that HUD has approved as well. I hope I answered your question, I'm not sure. So,
We budgeted 165 this year.
according to a finance person, we budgeted 165,000 this year for repayment towards the 200 and some odd dollars. 255,000. So that, once we pay that by June 30th, then the balance left will be 90,425.
So we budgeted that from city?
City general
budget,
fund,
okay.
yes, sir. And that was approved by mayor and council.
Okay, and then, on the 1, 2, 3, 4, on the fourth whereas, I said the city must recognize the amounts repaid. Shouldn't it read the city does recognize that the amounts repaid are considered federal, not must? Or is?
Doesn't change. That's a good change.
The city,
Or recognizes.
whereas the city must recognize that the amounts repaid are considered federal funds and are restricted to eligible uses under the low rent public housing rules and regulations. In other words, we recognize,
It says
yes.
must recognize, so,
Yes.
I mean, I think as we approve it tonight, I mean, it
Yes.
says we are recognizing it, so
Yes, sir.
So what do you-
change that.
You're saying that it should say, we recognize?
We recognize that the amounts repaid
We
are
recognize?
considered, whereas the city recognizes, or does recognize.
All right. Okay. Okay. I have those changes.
So Councilor Romero?
Not right now, we're not.
So clarification though, are you stating that we should list the specifics on the sale of the property?
The sale and maybe the repayment, the detail on the repayment, when it first occurred, the date back, the first repayment, I don't know, that's a suggestion that I would suggest, and I mean, that's why we're here today acknowledging this 3.8 is
Sure.
because of,
But we've already paid part of the balance. What they're asking us to do is to recognize the balance of the 400 and some $1,000 that we still owe them, which is that 90,000.
and the reason why I suggest this is just, let's say let's say it's a 10-year plan. I might not be here in 10 years, none of us might not be here, so if they go
Right.
to this resolution that maybe hasn't been paid or the agreement hasn't, then they don't have to go back to resolutions that said, they had the repayment plan, everything falls within this one document, is what I think that's what you would also.
I think I like that idea because I have not seen, and I don't think anybody else has seen, on this council, has seen the original repayment plan.
The repayment agreement?
Yeah. So I think it's a good idea to at least mention it in there because, have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
You?
So what you're saying is,
None of us have seen it.
so what you're saying is to document the 400,000 and then leave, and then of course acknowledging what has been paid and then what the balance is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we could add maybe not, if it's too much to include in that first paragraph, add a second whereas saying the city has, in whatever year it was, 2004? Was that when the repayment plan was signed by the council at that time?
It was signed in
2008, 13, I
Oh,
don't know what it was.
2016.
16, that's right, February of 2016. The council at that time, which was before, all three of us were even in the council, to show that that repayment plan was started then, and that show the amount of that repayment, the total amount, and then also on that same whereas, note how much has already been paid.
All right. With the balance showing.
Right.
And then we'll tie the first whereas of the 90,425 to the second whereas for the full repayment agreement.
Right.
Okay.
Counselor, and I had one more clarification to the attorney. Madam Attorney, did you review this document?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and just the reason why I asked is because it wasn't, the page that, the agenda request, your signature wasn't on it, so just,
I did review it.
okay.
Councilor
No comments.
Milburn?
No comments.
I have a question, Madam Manager. So when are we relegated to have this to HUD signed and delivered?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. So are we able to get the amendments into this document
Yes, sir.
today? Yes?
We're prepared to work on it this evening so that we can have your signature and have it submitted to HUD in the morning.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, going along those lines, Mr. Mayor, could we table action on it? And then while we go through the other agenda items, city attorney can work on making those amendments and then bring it back so that we can vote on it tonight and that way it'll be done? Can we do that? What do you think about that?
Can we vote on this document with amendments that were listed?
I'm not gonna vote on it until I see it and
Okay.
have it in
She
my
wants to
hot
bring
little
it back.
hand here.
Sure. Okay. What say you, Ms. Manager? Can we do
Is that
that?
right? Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay, then, Mr. Mayor, I move that we temporarily table Resolution 2005 for whatever amount of time it takes the city attorney to add the amendments that we have discussed this evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
So motion is made. Need a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussions? Any more discussions?
You can't discuss it till the motion.
No. Okay. Roll call, please.
Counselor Ulibarri Jr.?
Yes.
Counselor Casey?
Yes.
Counselor Romero?
Yes.
I have a motion by Counselor Casey, a second by Counselor Romero. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. The second item on the agenda is the approval, disapproval to appoint Mr. Mark Size, Councilor, Ward 2, upon the recommendation of the mayor of the city of Las Vegas. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Manager. I believe it's my responsibility to appoint the personnel that's going to sit on the Ward 2 seat until the new election takes place, which is going to be, what's the date on that? March 3rd? Is that right?
Yes.
And when the election is complete on March 3rd, when does the new counselor sit on the seat?
Mr. Mayor, so the election will take place March 3rd. The counselor will take his seat on April 1st
April 1st.
because he's unopposed.
Okay, all right, thank you. So it's my responsibility to appoint the personnel that's going to sit on this seat. And I, with pleasure and honor, I'd like to appoint Mr. Mark Sice. And Mark Sice was born in Santa Fe in 1951. He graduated from the Espanola High School in 1968. He married Eileen in 1975. He is a father of two sons, Jake and John, and one daughter, Rachel. He moved to Las Vegas in 1995. He retired from the food service industry in 2018. He's the pastor at the Cornerstone Church on 7th Street. And he is on the board of directors of two nonprofits in Las Vegas. It is my pleasure and honor to appoint Mr. Mark Sice upon the approval of the governing body, the governing council. So, need a motion to approve?
Mr. Mayor, can we hear from Mr. Sice and see if he has anything that he wants
Absolutely.
to add?
Absolutely. Mr. Sice, please step forward.
Excuse me?
Can you,
Sure I can.
thank you.
Good evening, Mr.
Before
Sykes.
before you do that, is the microphone on the,
Yes.
See?
Yes, it is.
okay, all right.
All right.
State your name and.
Sure. Mark Size from here in Las Vegas. I live on Peggy Lane. Like you've heard a little bit of my bio already of, very brief of where I came from. You guys don't know a lot about me. Ms. Casey and I did talk on the phone for a little bit day before yesterday, and I think it's an honor, I don't have any illusions that I can do much. I don't know, I've learned more about city government in the last 2 meetings that I've attended and a couple of more meetings that I've seen over the internet just to try to refresh up a little bit. So I don't have any illusions that I can, change the world, that I can come and I can affect Las Vegas positively the way that I'd like to affect it. But for me, it's an honor that Vince would even ask me to do the job. And if you guys have, as councilmen, if you have a problem with it, I understand it. There will be no hard or ill feelings on my side, but I do it because from where I've come from and to be able to even be considered in a town that I love, that I've adopted, and I believe that it has just so much potential that can still be realized, that if I can help, I'll be more than glad to do it. And that's why I'm here today.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Sykes? Yes, Councilor Yellowberry?
Mr. Mayor, the last time we were here, we tabled the item on Mr. Sides. I don't have mine. I know Mr. Sides is like this. What I'm really looking at is we're only like 35 days from the election. And to bring another councilman in here, the agendas are, I don't know how hard they're going to be, or for another councilor to make decisions or not to make decisions. I'm looking at the elections. I'm looking at what's coming in the elections. I cannot agree with you on this because it's election year now, and I think we don't need somebody in here till the elections are in. If it would have been a case, we could have got a councilor that did go and fill this application. We could have asked him to do it, so, but I can't agree on that, so.
Okay, but I'd like to, if I can respond to that. The last comment that you made at the last meeting, you were concerned about the dollar value of
Yes, sir.
having him sit on the seat. As you know, that there is no concerns about that because he would be getting the same dollars that I would if I would have sat in that seat. And in regards to the meetings that he will be sitting on and voting, in February, there's only 2 meetings. One is a working session meeting with no voting abilities on that date. And the second one is the only voting meeting that he would sit. And after that meeting, Mr. Montoya will be sitting on the seat. Okay? And I think that Mr. Montoya has 4 years to give his wonderful ideas that he has for our city council. And I believe that he will do well. I think that my appointment is because I wanted Mr. Sykes as a person that has high integrity and has passion for the community of Las Vegas to sit on that seat. And I think that the voting issue that you have it should not be a problem. But I appreciate your comment. And when we have a vote, then you can place your vote.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Oh.
Go ahead. Councilor Romero?
No, well, what I was going to say was that at the last meeting, we tabled this item, so actually we're all kind of out of order here because the item should have been removed from the table and made the next order of business.
Okay.
And so I would like to do that now. I would like to move that we remove the appointment of Councilor Mark Seiss for Ward 2 off the table and make it the next order of business. And now we can continue the, well, we need to vote and
There's a motion on the floor,
Second.
second by Councilor Romero. Any more oh, there's no discussions
yeah,
on
roll
that,
call,
right?
yeah.
Roll call, please.
Councilor Romero?
Yes.
Councilor Ulibarri Jr.?
Yes.
Councilor Casey?
Yes.
Have a motion by Councilor Casey, a second by Councilor Romero. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you. And now the
He has
appointment
a
is back on the thing.
question.
So just Councilor Romero.
Mr. Seiss, I just want to thank you for your, wanting to serve. You made a comment that kind of caught my eye, and this is one of my, my reasonings as to, why I disagree with the mayor on his appointment. You made the comment that you can't change the world, or the city within, the little time that we have. And as we all know, our city needs desperate help. We need somebody that's going to jump in there and work from day one, which I don't doubt that you will. But, and I think I mentioned this to Councilor Hall, is that, I think we have somebody that has the experience, right now, ready to work. And again, Mr. Hall, Mayor Hall, this is no disrespect to you, but I think this again, I think Mr. Montoya would be, the perfect option right now as to, he'd get in that chair and he'd start work right away. I know, in being in Santa Fe, I think he's already gone to Santa Fe already on behalf of the city, which is good. I mean, you don't have to be doing that. And I think that's the kind of person we need right now. I know, it's only 1 month. You said there's not too much, going to be on the one actual meeting. But it takes a lot of time for HR to go through the, putting him in payroll, the processing, all that time and effort that city employees are going to put, that we're going to go through it twice, and had we had longer, Mr. Seiss, had we had 6 months, 7 months, I'd have no problem, in approving Mayor Howell's appointment tonight. But the timing that we have, I'm in favor of somebody that's ready to work right,
Well, if I could address that.
Go ahead.
Is it okay if I do?
Absolutely.
I don't have a problem. I know Mr. Montoya, we were on board together with Love Your Neighbor for years, so I know him and I know his character. So I don't have a problem with what you're saying. And if it's decided against me there, I'm still going to be I've been working for Las Vegas, for the homeless. I've been working for a lot of issues that we've had, from my little church with a little bit of people that I work with, and I'm going to continue to do it. In fact, I think this is going to help me even that much more to do more for Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So whatever you guys decide.
No question as far as your integrity, your
Yeah.
commitment, your willingness
Sure.
to serve.
Yeah.
It just, like I say, we need desperate help, and I see Mr. Montoya jumping in and getting to work right away. And
Sure.
he's already working right now, and that's, that's a...
And if there's ways that you think that I can help in other ways, I'm more than glad. I have an open ear for that.
Councilor Casey?
I did speak to Mr. Seiss on the phone, and I did get some phone calls today opposing his appointment. But I have, and I know Mr. Montoya, I've known him for a long time, and worked with his wife, and love his daughter and all that good stuff, so. But I also respect the electoral process, and although he is unopposed, he still has to go through the electoral process and get elected. And so, I have really mixed feelings about that, and, not that I don't want you here, but I think that things should work the way they're supposed to and get elected into an office where you're going to be there for 4 years. And so a temporary appointment is not a bad thing, and had the previous mayor resigned sooner, we wouldn't be facing this issue. And, we wouldn't have to, we could have had somebody in that position appointed for a longer period of time. And so, 2 meetings is really not a whole lot to be too concerned about. And I think Mr. Montoya has been here for the last couple of meetings that we've had, so he knows what's going on. He's aware of what is happening, and I'm sure that, he is free to give input to any one of us, and the mayor, to you, just like any other citizen. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve or disapprove the appointment of Mr. Mark Seiss.
I move that we appoint Mr. Mark Seiss for Council Ward 2 for whatever period of time until April 1st, when Mr. Montoya will take office.
There's a motion. We need a second. Okay, motion dies because of the lack of a second. Thank you very much, and I want to make a comment. And Mr. Seiss, I again apologize for this situation.
Apology not needed. Vince, no problem.
I also think that Mr. Seiss was my choice of appointment, and Mr. Montoya was not my choice of appointment. Mr. Montoya is a very good man, and I know him also. He was in my district, and he has 4 wonderful years for him to give his input and his energy to our community, and I know very well that he will. But that's when he gets elected by the community of Las Vegas. And I don't, as I understand, Madam Attorney's not here, but Madam Manager, that
I believe we go to election.
we go to another special election.
Yes, yes, sir.
And does the 45 days fall outside of my time frame that I have to appoint?
I believe it falls within a 4 or 5 day period, yes, sir.
Yes, and that would be after the election?
Yes, sir.
So what does that mean if I don't appoint one?
I'll defer that question to City Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, I believe that would be a question for our city attorney. I don't know how that would be handled, being that the charter, the municipal charter is very clear.
And what is
It
it, can you
states-
restate that,
I can
please?
restate that for the record. As per the City of Las Vegas Municipal Charter, Article 2, Section 2.05, vacancy in office, C, the mayor with approval of the council shall within 15 days of the vacancy appoint a qualified elector from the district to fill the vacancy and who will serve until the next regular election. If the office is not filled within 45 days of the vacancy, a special election shall be called to fill the vacancy for the remaining term of the office, which that would fall right into the election that's coming up on March 3rd.
That would be after the election,
So,
the 45 days. Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? Okay. So that means that we would have to hold a special election even after Mr. Montoya is elected.
I don't believe that's correct. That
Okay,
we
so-
would have to get the advice of the attorney.
All right. So what is the cost of a special election?
An election can cost up to about $25,000.
Okay. All right, so therefore, at this point, we don't have an appointment to sit on the seat. Thank you, Mr. Sykes.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next item on the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Seiss. The next item on the agenda is the discussion with the Acequia members. We have Maria Gilberry, and then we have, the city officials will have a discussion with the Acequia membership. This is an open discussion. So how do we want to proceed, Mayor Howell? Do we want the SECA membership to come up and then have a question and answer? Is that
Well,
the
this is the
format?
way I understood it, as they would come up and together as an association and have approximately overall 30 minutes to speak, and 20 minutes of that will be for their presentation and 10 minutes for question and answer. That's the way I understood it.
Okay, then we shall proceed. Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you. Michelle. Have a seat.
Good evening, Mr. Gonzalez.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. How are you?
We're fine.
Good, good. Mayor, today I've brought with me the president of the Rio Gallinas Acequia Association, which I'm happy to introduce to you. Her name is Michelle Varner. She is new to the Las Vegas area, and being so new to the Las Vegas area, we needed some new leadership, and so she stepped up to the plate and has jumped in to help with the association. Michelle bought the old farm that belonged to Curtis Solohup. She is a horse person. She loves horses. She's managing the farm and is actively involved in the community. So welcome, Michelle. And if you want to say anything?
Oh, well, some of you know I teach history at West Las Vegas. I've been here, this is my 5th year. I went to college here in the 80s, so I returned because I love Las Vegas so much. So I'm vested in the community, and I plan to live the rest of my life here. So this is passion for me. So also, I don't know that we don't have bells and whistles for our presentation. I think it's just sort of an overview, maybe some background for you guys, and then whatever questions that you have for us.
If I may, can you restate your name, please?
Michelle Varner.
Michelle, B-O-N-N-E-R?
V-A-R-N-E-R. Yeah.
Varner. Thank you.
Mayor, also in council, with us also tonight are numerous Acequia members. If I could ask that all the Acequia members please stand up. Each one of these individuals is either a Parciante or a commissioner or a mayordomo on one of our community ditches of the 10 ditches that we represent. They are from the upper reaches of the canyon, up in Gallinas Canyon. We have the Placita Arriba represented, the Upper Maestas, and we don't have a representative from El Porvenir, but there's 3 ditches up on top. In here in town, we have representatives from each one of the ditches, from Acequia Madre Los Vejiles, from the Agapito Vigil ditch, from Acequia Madre Los Veneros, Acequia Madre Las Vegas, and the Roundhouse ditch. And then from the lower basin, we have representatives from the San Agustin ditch, which I am a member of myself, and also La Concepcion ditch. So that's pretty rounds up the 10 acequias that we represent. Thank you all.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone.
Mayor and Council, just to give you a little background as to who we are the Rio Gallinas Acequia Association. We are a nonprofit that was formed in the fall of 1991. This association was formed at the request of, or by default, if you will, at the request of the local acequias. We needed to have an organization that would represent the majority of the acequias in the adjudication of water rights. And so the organization was formed in 1991, in the fall of 91, and at that time it represented 13 community ditches. Today we only represent 10. Some of the community ditches that were formerly community ditches have now become private ditches because they have no commissions. Some have sold their water rights to the city and various reasons, but we lost 3 community ditches in the process. This adjudication of water rights on the Gallinas started in 1991. This is has been our charge for probably the last 28 years. The association has, through funding appropriated by the legislature, has solicited grant funding to hire attorneys and experts
historians, hydrologists, and as such to be able to present their case in the adjudication of water rights along the Guaymas River. We completed this adjudication after 28 years. Last year, we completed the final phases of the adjudication, and we did the interstate challenges on individuals' water rights that happened last year. The only thing pending in the adjudication process is the remand. The remand is an action that started way back in 1956 in some of the driest times of New Mexico. It was a very, very dry time. 1956, the Guaymas River was almost completely dry. There was very little water. There was a franchise by the name of the Agua Pura Company who had been charged with providing municipal water. They started developing their system in 1881, and when the drought of the 50s hit in the 1950s, PNM, or not PNM, but the Agua Pura Company later became PNM, but in the 50s it was the Agua Pura Company. They were diverting upstream, and that is one of the issues that I've listed on the fact sheet here for you, is the location of our diversion upstream in the Guaymas is above 6 acequias here in town and 2 on the bottom. And so the impacts or whatever the city's activities are with regards to diversions or bypass water at that location is what's left for the acequias and for Story Project and for the Guaymas Canal, which is another acequia. So in the 50s, when this drought hit, there was a farmer on the Romero Ditch, a guy by the name of Cartwright, that rallied other people in the middle portion of the ditch. They filed what was called a priority call. This is when a senior water user is not getting their water right, the water that they're entitled to. They can call upon the state based on their priority. If they're senior, the state's supposed to shut down junior users. So what happened is this priority call was made by Mr. Cartwright. There was a water master that was brought in to administer flows here in the Guaymas, much like we have today. The governor was involved. Governor Mitchum was involved. The state engineer was involved. They ran tests on the river to see how they could run water. The water master issued an order to the Agua Pura Company to cease diversions, to honor the seniority of the senior acequias. They refused to honor that order. Eventually, the case wound up in court, in the court systems, working its way all the way up to the New Mexico Supreme Court. Initial readings were, yes, there is, let me go back a little bit. At that time, the city of Las Vegas was not involved in the adjudication or involved in any litigation. There was a fellow here in Las Vegas by the name of Tiny Martinez, a very prominent attorney. Tiny Martinez got the city of Las Vegas involved in this litigation by claiming what he called a Pueblo water right. Unlike a Pueblo water right of the Native Americans, the Pueblos, this Pueblo water right was one that was under Spanish law. Under Spanish law, a Pueblo settled under Spanish law could take as much water as it needed, when it needed it, to fulfill the requirements of the community. So this made its way through the courts. First decision, there is a Pueblo water right. Second decision, no, there's not a Pueblo water right. The third time it got up there for review, it was a split decision. 2 justices tied, the decision stood. So from 1959 to 2004, when the state of New Mexico asked the Supreme Court to review this case under what is called certiorari, the Supreme Court reviewed it and said, gee, we made a mistake. There's no such thing as a Pueblo water right now. You guys go back into district court and you figure out an equitable remedy. And by the way, there's no damages for all the water that the community took from 1956 to 2004. There's no recouping none of that. So just go work out an equitable remedy. So in 2004, the case, the remand, as we refer to it, used to be known as Cartwright or the Pueblo Water Rights Doctrine. Now we refer to it as the remand, was consolidated into the adjudication process. Okay, so for the last 16 years, we've spent litigation on the remand, trying to come up with a solution, and also have spent a lot of time in negotiating with the city, over the sharing of water. We believe, the Acequias believe, that really this litigation is not necessary. If we can enter into a sharing agreement, one that is binding on the parties, respected by the parties, and something that we can go into the future with. So we don't have to be amending schedules every year. We're looking more for a permanent agreement. Okay, so the cities, the other thing you notice on the issues, the first issue I listed on the paper before you is the remand. This is perhaps the one thing that is driving the litigation more than anything. It's the city's claim to an 1835 priority based on the granting of the Las Vegas grant. Well, if you think about it, when the Las Vegas grant was granted to those 25 families that came here, they were placed in their possessions, their land, for them to build a house, for them to grow food, and they were told to build a community. Well, they didn't jump into it and start building a community. What they did is build some jacales, some really crude homes. In fact, the first year, they weren't even able to stay here. They left, and they came back in 1836. And only after they were successful in growing a good plot of beans were we able to stay here in Las Vegas on a permanent basis. Other than that, we were using this area for grazing and coming back and forth to San Miguel del Vado. So if we use the logic that these families came in 1835, and the city is claiming 1835, well, wouldn't it be the same thing for the Acequias to claim 1835? Because they also started at that time, that's really when they started, was the day they got here. They started building irrigation ditches so that they could grow food. We didn't have grocery stores, we didn't have the modern amenities that we have today. So everyday survival was very crucial to these settlers. So just, I'll put that thought just in your mind as to really what that 1835 means. If we say the 1835 is when the community is established, okay, that's when the grant was granted. But think about it, the community didn't come by to existence until way late in the game. And even the Alvatura Company didn't start providing municipal water till 1881. Prior to that, the only water source that had been developed by the city was a well at the Old Town Plaza that was a common water source. And the infrastructure, the water infrastructure that was in place was the system of acequias. People were taking water from the acequias for laundry, for cooking, and for whatever uses they had, lifestyle. And so the city has, in this remand and in the effort to find an equitable remedy, if you will, has suggested that, okay, what's equitable for us, the city, is that we get an 1835 priority for 1,200 acre-feet of water. And we're willing to pay the Acequias up to $1 million in exchange for that. And the attorneys have argued that that $1 million could be used by the Acequias to improve the Acequia systems, which is true, it can be. But really, if you think about all the improvements that we've made already in this community, really ask yourself, how vital is that 1835 security priority date for the city? We have repaired Radnor, restored it back to where it was. We have improved our infrastructure to divert water in both in capacity and transmission lines. We have done a meter replacement. We've reduced our city consumption of water by 1 million gallons a day, largely through our conservation efforts, the repair of major leaks that existed in the system for years. and really good water conservation by the community as a whole. Along with that, we have also put in to use our effluent water. And we use our effluent water extensively in watering the parks. We make it available to residents so they can water their landscapes at their home. And so we've made great strides in trying to secure the community's future into the future so that we don't have to worry about water. We now have 1,000 acre-feet of permanent storage at Story Lake. I mean, that's one heck of a big accomplishment to have that. 1,000 acre-feet of storage water at Story Lake can provide substantial water for this community, possibly up to 2 or 3 years if it's supplemented with what's in the river, maybe even longer, without adding any water to it. Just depends on how you use it. And so what we have done through all this period, now we're at the end of this litigation. Last year, or the year before, the special master, Judge Snyder, who was overseeing the adjudication, finished taking testimony. He said, I'm done. I can't handle this anymore. I'm retiring, is basically what he said. And let Judge Wassler worry about the outcome of it. But he had a responsibility to put forward a report. In his report, he recommended to the judge, Judge Wassler, who was overseeing this case, he recommended to him that the city receive an 1835 priority date for 1,200 acre-feet of water, which is what the city is asking for. And in exchange, the city would also pay the Acequias $1.7 million. That was the judge's recommendation, the special master. And that's what he felt was an equitable remedy. We, on the other hand, believe that's not really equitable, because it doesn't compensate fully for the Acequias the amount of water that would be taken over a period of time. And so we also don't see the need for an 1835 priority given the improvements and how safe our system is today. The 1835 priority does not provide additional water to the city at all. All it does is it changes one priority of 1881 to 1835. It puts you ahead of the line. That's all it does. It doesn't give you any additional water. Now, as we went through this litigation, there were attempts by the city and the state engineer to get an additional 500 acre-feet of water, and that was litigated and also appealed, and the decision was that the city was not entitled to an additional 500 acre-feet. That was litigation that happened in 1999 as part of the adjudication process. And so we're here today to ask you to please, in good faith, meet with us so that we can sit down and try and iron out a solution to this 5 or 6 decade old litigation. We feel that it's no longer necessary. We have, over the years, since 2004 to present, the Acequias developed a sharing agreement back in 2004 under the guidance of Mayor Tony Marcus. He was open-minded. Mayor Tony Marcus called me one day and he said, look, you got to do something about this litigation. What do you suggest? And I responded and said, hey, we can share water. That would be a great way to start this process. And so we agreed, and we sat down for, I can't tell you how many meetings, and negotiated a sharing agreement and agreed that for 3 years, we would try the sharing agreement between us to see if it worked. It was great. I never saw so much cooperation between the Acequias and the city as I did in those 3 years, because we were calling each other on a regular basis. Hey, I don't need water. You guys take it. And it happened simultaneously, and it was great for those 3 years. The purpose that we did it for only 3 years was so that we could perfect a sharing agreement that would be more accurately reflect what the needs are. Well, we're there. We're almost right there right now with the sharing agreement we have. Most recently, about 2 weeks ago, the special master forwarded to the city and forwarded to the Acequias the proposed 2020 sharing agreement. And he's asking for our comments. I would love nothing more than to go back to the water master with one sharing agreement coming both from the Acequias and the city that is exactly the same, and say, this is what we want. This is what will end this litigation. And so we have that to act on, is he needs it before the 1st of April, so that he can publish that and get it out in the community. Anything else at this point?
I think we still have a court date set. Yeah.
Okay. The judge, when he extended this to give us an opportunity for negotiation, he gave us a deadline of March. He also offered the services of 2 professional negotiators, to hire one to help us through this process should we need them, but we have not heard from the judge yet when that hiring is going to take place. The 2 nominees that were provided by the judge, one was Elud Martinez, who was the former state engineer, and the other one was Esteban Lopez, who was the former Interstate Stream Commissioner. So both have excellent credentials. They're very familiar with water. We have no problems with either one sitting in the negotiations. Initially, we would ask that our negotiations be conducted without attorneys until such point as we reach a point in our negotiations where we have something we can put on writing and spend the money on the attorneys at that point, rather than to spend it for them to sit and discuss with us. We would also encourage council participation in this negotiations. The last negotiations that we had, Mayor Tonita Giron Gulue participated, I think, once or twice, and that was the extent of what we saw in participation by any of the elected officials. We really believe that if those of you who are on council or you, Mayor, actually have a first-hand to sit in on these discussions and ask questions, I think that you can understand where there's plenty of room to settle this particular case without much need to have further litigation. The danger in allowing this litigation to continue is eventually the judge's going to make a decision. He's going to make a decision. He's already told us that. I want to do some finality to this. And I'll tell you what, if you guys don't like the decision he comes up with, I'm sure you're going to appeal. Same thing with us. If we don't like the decision, we're going to appeal. And what's going to happen then? Then we're going to be in litigation for another 30 to 40 years. And most of us will be dead and gone before this is finally resolved. So I really thank you for this opportunity to present to you. I think the climate is right. I think the personalities that are here are individuals that understand what the issue are. You're open simply by opening this door to discuss with you. Shows your willingness to come to the table and discuss it, and I applaud you for that. It hasn't happened until today, and I can honestly say I'm really, really proud that you guys have allowed this to happen. Thank you. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Madam Manager, wasn't Ms. Gilberry also going to present? Sorry to put on the spot.
Mayor, councilors, I didn't intend on presenting, but I would like to, if possible, correct a couple of, or provide some additional information.
Input, please.
Just to clarify, and I think sometimes...
Before you go ahead, and after your comments, I'd like to open it up for questions. Go ahead.
Just to be able to clarify some information, because I know that sometimes different parties don't all have all that information. The city of Las Vegas has 800 acre-feet in storage. We don't have 1,000. And in the last 2 years, we've used 400 acre-feet each year. We used 400 acre-feet in 2018 and 400 acre-feet in 2019. We've not had a lot of water coming down the river since Bradner came online to be able to put water into Bradner and into Story and into Peterson. For the last several months, all of the water that we've been taking off the river has been going directly to Peterson. So the city does have a need for being able to make sure that we can add water to our current reservoirs. And like I said, so I really haven't added anything to Story. I've been taking out of Story, but haven't been able to add into Story. Bradner is finished, but the state engineer is not allowed us to put any more water into it until we address some issues with the reservoir. And it'll be 1 year after we finish with the reservoir, topping it off, and the state engineer gives us permission to be able to use it. So it's at least a year out before we'll be able to use Bradner. And currently, every drop of water we're taking off the river right now, which is prior to our rotation schedule, our sharing agreement, is going into Peterson. So that's so from my perspective, and from which I'm here as the utilities director, making sure that I have enough water for the community. We've needed the space we've had, and we need to be able to take the water off the river when we can, and also be able to work with the acequias. And I think the last few years, and Mr. Gonzalez is absolutely correct, the sharing agreement we've used for the last couple of years has been working. That being said, there's still some needs that the city has that we haven't been able to meet, and we're going to continue to work towards meeting those needs.
Thank you, thank you. Ms. Guevara, if you can, just stay there so we can have questions and answers. Yes, Mr. Gonzalez.
Mayor, if I could just add, thank you, Maria, for bringing this to the attention. Our sharing schedule that we have really does not come into place until the river flows drop to 15 CFS. Okay, and that normally happens right at the tail end of the spring runoff. In the spring runoff, we see flows on that river, sometimes 50, 60, 70 CFS, depending on how much snowpack we have up in the high country. And so it's in June, July, and August that are the critical months that sharing agreement comes into place.
Can you give us a brief explanation for the audience what 15 CFS means?
15 CFS is 15 cubic feet per second that is flowing through an area. So if you take an area 15 cubic feet, that's how much water is going through. 15 cubic feet equates to about 30 acre feet in a 24-hour time frame. Is that right? Yeah. So in 24 hours, if you're taking 15 CFS, you should be able to get about 30 acre feet into your reservoirs. And I would really encourage you, particularly now during the spring runoff, that you take advantage of those high flows, because that's what we need to do. We need to capture that water here in Las Vegas when it's available. Okay. If we don't catch it when it's available, it goes downstream, doesn't even make it to the Pecos, it's lost in the system. And so I think we're all better off served if we seek those kind of opportunities, particularly spring runoff and storm events, which you guys do, and continue to try and cash in on those opportunities. Another potential opportunity is when the hay cropping takes place in Las Vegas. Twice a year, the acequias, for the most part, most of them are harvesting hay for about 10 days to 2 weeks. And there's another opportunity where the acequias aren't using as much water as they would normally. There's some wiggle room there to work with the community to make sure that we do have a safe water supply. Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
I'll open it up for questions. Councilman Yulberg?
Wait a minute. How many members are you in the acequias?
How many members in the acequia? There are 10 community ditches. Each one of those community ditches has a minimum of at least 4 members to be a community ditch. Some acequias have as many as 80 members, like the Acequia Madre de los Romeros, which is the largest membership acequia. That's all along 8th Street and Cinder Road. They have about 80 members. So it varies. My acequia down in Lourdes, there's 7 of us.
Another thing, how many non-members use that acequias? Or do if the acequias are going down from the Gainas all the way down, is there any members that use that acequias without you knowing?
Not that I'm aware of. Normally, the commissions address the water allocations within their ditches. Like, for instance, on our ditch, we ourselves have a rotation schedule on our ditch with our membership. I get water every 15 days in our rotation. Some of the other ditches have other methods of allocation, and so can I sit here and tell you that nobody's taking water from the ditch? No, I can't, because there's people that even drive up to the river with pumps and fill up tankers and go. And so that's a job for the water master to monitor. And we do monitor in conjunction with him. If I see somebody with a pumper down on Cinder Road taking water out of the river, my first call is normally to the water master to see if he knows about it.
Because
And so-
I'm pretty sure they do that, because,
Sure.
And it's been going on for years. Another thing, say the city loses the 1835 priority date, what's gonna happen if we really get into a big old drought in 50 years or 60 years,
Okay.
what could happen, because if we lose that 1835 priority?
Well, right now you don't have it. Okay, so you're not losing anything. The recommendation from the court is that you be awarded it from the special master, but you don't have an 1835 at this point. Okay?
That's part of the appeal. The
That-
city
That's
is
that's part of what's going on. Okay, so what happens if you don't get that 1835? I guess that's the question that you're asking,
Right.
is what happens? Well, in the previous sharing agreements that we've had and discussions that we've had with the city, and Maria can verify this, the Acequias have basically come up front and said, look, you have our assurance that we will never call priority on the city. So you don't have to worry about the Acequias calling priority. You write that into whatever agreement you finalize. You all are operating on the same priority, basically, because you're not calling priority on each other. The other thing that the sharing agreement does, if the river drops to 4 CFS, which is very, very dry, 4 CFS is, that river's almost dry. The Acequias have already agreed with the city and the state engineer that you guys can have the entire flow of the river, all 4 CFS. Is that right? So I don't see where it's a danger for the community.
And don't we need a certain level for conveyance anyway? So
Yeah.
we wouldn't have the
We
water to
wouldn't
pay.
get, if the river dropped to 4 CFS, the Acequias couldn't make beneficial
It won't
use
go
of that
down.
water. We're just wasting it if we try to get it to an Acequia.
I think we need to have our attorneys give us a little more information on
That's
that.
fine.
It's on my thing, that, the rest of my consuls can say what they want.
Could you repeat that? I didn't hear you. Sorry.
I'm saying that we should just get our attorneys, our water attorneys, give us more info on what's going on, and then go from there.
Ms. Maria, do you have a question?
Just to
Response to that?
provide a little additional information for this, yes, the city can take, when the river's below 4 CFS, the city can take 4, but we've already committed, and the city needs to leave about 1 CFS in the river for riparian, for the health of the river, so that gives us 3 CFS. Then that's not all the time, because we're on the river and off the river, so many days, we're trying to not only meet the needs of the community, we're also trying to recover from the days that we were off. And that's on a daily or weekly schedule. On a annual schedule, when we have droughts like we had back in 2011, we're using all the water in our reservoirs. So the next year when we have more water, we're not only trying to take care of the community's needs, but we're also trying to refill our storage. And that's why the city definitely needs to make sure that we have plenty of water rights and water to be able to refill at the same time as providing water for the community.
Council Casey?
Thank you. How many Acequias have priority water rights before 1881?
Every Acequia on the Gallinas has a priority date prior to 1881. Every Acequia,
All of them?
every one of them. The earliest Acequia on the basin is down in San Agustin in Lourdes. They have an 1841 seniority. And then the Acequias here in town, the majority of them have 1848, as late as 1878. Up in the upper basin, 1865, 1868, 1870, those type of priorities. So the Acequias are the most senior, the city and the Acequias are the most senior on the system. There's the Gallinas Canal and Storage Irrigation Company that has reorganized as an Acequia. We don't represent them. They have an 1887 priority date, and those are the lands that are located around the drive-in theater on 7th Street going out. And then their Story project, which is 1907. Now, the city also owns 1848 priority date water rights that you bought from the Acequias. I think it's somewhere around 70 or 80 acre feet.
The water rights?
Yeah.
35.
So you bought some previous water rights with 1848. You've also bought some water rights from the Gallinas Canal and Storage Company, I believe, with 1887. On the Conico subdivision, I believe he cashed in some water rights in exchange for water taps out there. Now, this 1835 that the city is asking for, right now the city's priorities or the adjudicated priorities that you have are 1881 for 2,600 acre feet. What we're asking, or the city is asking the court, is to take that 2,600 acre feet and to split it and give the city only 1,200 acre feet with 1835 and the remaining 1,400 acre feet with 1881. So you would wind up with a split priority. That's what the attorneys have argued for.
So, I guess I'm, it's upsetting to me to see what has happened over the years. And I was talking to somebody, and I said, I first met Mr. Estrada when I was a state legislator, and I was 32 years old at that time. I'm a lot older now. And we're still arguing over the same thing. And it's like, for heaven's sake, let's get this taken care of and get it done. It's ridiculous that it's been happening for this long. And what's even more ridiculous is that the mistakes that have been made by our judicial system and others that have prolonged what is happening here. And I think it's shameful. I think it's a sad thing that has happened. And I think that we need to do whatever we can to preserve our acequias. And the use of water needs to be shared. And I don't see why we can't come up with an equitable plan where everybody gets to share the water and do it in a manner that is not going to hurt the community or the acequia users. I think it's very important that we do that. Maria, I have a question for you. You said that Radnor can't be online, I guess, or whatever you call it, for another year. What is wrong that we can't do that?
Madam Councilor, Madam Mayor, Madam Manager, a couple of the piezometers that were installed, which are our monitoring wells, settled, and then groundwater or surface water was leaking into the monitoring wells, giving us false readings. And because the purpose of those piezometers is to be able to detect if there's any seepage through the dam face, it's giving us false readings. So we can't truly say the condition of the dam, the embankment itself, until we get that addressed, which we did this week. We make sure that it is no longer getting surface water into the piezometers, and we get actual accurate readings. Then the state engineer will allow us to continue to put water in it. But until then, to be safe, we are not and cannot add any water to it. And then the year is, because it was offline since about 2015, roughly, the embankments dry out, and so this whole time they're absorbing moisture, and the goal is that they absorb the moisture, they solidify, and that there are no rodent paths through it or any kind of vegetation paths through it, resulting in the water leaking through the embankment itself. So we need to make sure that it's 100% safe before as we're filling it, we stop in increments, and before we use it, it needs to settle and make sure that everything meets standards.
Okay. So the only water that we're using now is all in Peterson.
Peterson, we have Story as the backup. Like I said, we have already in 2019 used 400 acre feet. But right now, almost every drop of water that we're taking off the river is going directly into Peterson, and most of that is being used right away.
Okay. So we've already used all the water that we had at Story?
We've used 800, we purchased 1,200 in volume, but we had an 800 acre foot space. So once we got below 800 acre feet, we can't add any more other than storing 800. So we have used over 800 of the 1,200. So there's a little bit left. There's still some left, but I've been able to only put a little bit back in because of the lack of water coming down the river at the time that I was able to put water back in the store.
Okay, and I'm asking all this because I've had phone calls for people that drive out there and they call me up and say, Barbara, have you been out to Story Lake? There's no water in it. You know, and I'm like, yes, there is. Like, it's really low. You need to do something about it right away. And people get worried.
The city of Las Vegas has at least 400 acre feet in there right now, but like I said, I used that much last year, so there's a chance within the next 12 months that I'll use a good portion of that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Romero? No, she asked a couple questions that I had. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. She asked the questions that I had. Okay.
Great minds think alike.
So, thank you, councilors. I have a question. Okay, they were told that if we were in a drought and the Acequias called for the 1835 priority call, that the state engineer, even with our water sharing agreement, would not get involved in that decision. Have you heard anything about that?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I didn't understand.
Okay, if there was a drought and the Acequia Association called the 1835 priority call, and would not, the state engineer said that it was between you and the association. He's not going to get involved with the priority call.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure what the question was to the state engineer, but the way it works, Mayor, if you're a senior water right owner and you're not receiving your water allocation, you can call upon the state engineer to enforce priority, okay? Historically, there's been very few instances where priority administration has been imposed, especially when it involves a municipality. The state is very reluctant to shut down a municipality. I suspect that's probably exactly what happened in 1956. The governor was involved, the state engineer was involved, and so you couldn't shut down a municipality at that time. It's unfortunate that back then, nobody thought about, well, if we need the water and they're senior, why don't we compensate them for the water? Okay, which is a process that we've used here in this community. We've leased water from Story Lake. We've bought storage water at Story Lake many years prior to this last agreement that we have with Story Lake now for permanent storage. Prior to that, this community was on a yearly basis entering into lease agreements with Story Project over stored water for 500 acre feet. That went on for at least 10 years or more, and that 500 acre feet out of those 10 years may have been used one time. And it was, the way it was explained to me by previous administrations was that 500 acre feet was security water. Richard Trujillo and others felt that that's the way they had to manage the system. The other thing that has happened is the city of Las Vegas in general, although we have other sources of water, we have a well field that supplements our municipal water as well. The cheapest and least expensive method for us to attain water is gravity-fed water from the river. So that has been our preference. We need to possibly rethink and see if we need to maybe invest some money in these transmission lines rather than to let water evaporate for non-use. and actually start using. I think Maria's been using a lot of that water, and I commend her for that. Last year, the municipality didn't divert its total entitlement of water, which I thought was really super in many ways, because it demonstrates a willingness to share by this person right here operating the plant up there. To me, that's what it demonstrates. You could have very easily taken all 2,600 acre-feet last year because it was there.
If I can just add, again, we don't have, it won't convey, it's not gonna go down our acequias if we're below a certain level. So
Sure.
the priority
The priority
is a
date is
moot,
not
it's
reached.
moot,
I see.
yeah.
I have a question for Ms. Gilberry. If, I'd like to know your opinion about the water sharing agreement. Do you feel that it would work for us, both for the Sakias and for us?
Mayor, councilors, Madam Manager, the way it's been working for the last couple of years has been tight, but it's been working. And there's been a couple of years where the water's been good and the sharing agreement has been there, but really not an impact. The more water that we have coming down the river, the better for all of us. When we are in a drought situation, that sharing agreement will put the city in a tight position if we've not been able to top off our reservoirs the year before. So multi-year droughts do put us into a much tighter space. And I know that Mr. Gonzalez and I have spoken about the minimum. We do take a minimum of 1.5 CFS off the river at all times. It takes at least 2 CFS to take care of our average to slightly above average day. The 1.5 CFS is a little bit less than what we need. I told you previously that it was what we needed. It's a little bit less than what we need to meet our 1.4, 1.5 million gallons a day is what the community currently uses, down from 2.7 million. The 1.5 CFS is a little over 1 million gallons a day. So it is less than what the city needs. So currently, I do like how the sharing agreement has been working out. A multi-year drought could be tough for the city, and I would have to provide specific information at that time. But based on my experiences over the last few years, we've been okay with the sharing agreement.
It would behoove us, as the city, to really manage this water system in the right way.
And as the utilities director, Mr. Mayor, that's one of my biggest responsibilities is to make sure that we're not wasting water. For instance, my directive to my staff is any drop of water that comes off the river right now, it has to go to Peterson as a priority because that's our usable reservoir. Filling Bradner is a luxury right now. Even putting water into Story is a luxury right now. It's got to be Peterson. Once Peterson is topped off, then Story would be our second reservoir because that is at least usable.
I see.
And I wouldn't put any more water into Bradner until Story was full at 800 and Peterson was full, or we were in a heavy rain and we only wanted to be able to take that water. And that's, I'm not going to be able to address that until September or October of this year.
When you're done.
Okay. Tell me again, Mr. Gonzalez, the deadline that the judge had
He
spoken.
gave us till March, Mayor.
March.
He didn't give us a particular date in March. Did you get a date?
I believe the judge is currently working on a mediator so that the city and the Acequias can have a mediation, if I recall the judge's statement correctly. So
This
even though he
March.
gave us a date,
Yeah.
I believe that the judge knows that he's also committed to providing a mediator for the city and the Acequias.
Okay, so the mediator will give us a call to let us know
Yes,
when the date will be?
yes.
Is that correct?
I would imagine that the judge will probably advise the parties that a mediator has been hired, and then it'll be up to us.
I believe that
So
would
that process is all about if the judge finds the mediator.
when, I would
When?
I would say when.
When.
Yeah, mediator.
Yeah.
Fairly certain the judge wants to make sure that we have an option.
Right.
Mayor, if I could just indicate that we really believe that we don't need to wait for a mediator to be part of the process for us to begin the discussions and to try and figure out if we can even get to a reachable agreement. I think our early discussion would probably determine that if we had a meeting with you all and said, okay, this is what the concerns are and how are we going to address them. I don't think we need a mediator for that purpose. When we get into discussing into the issues and maybe trying to resolve some of the issues perhaps, I would have hoped that the court would have already hired the mediator and he'd be available, but he hasn't to my knowledge.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Councilor Casey?
Thank you. So the judge will decide who the mediator is? Or do we have any input into that?
Council, we did have input, and we did, a couple of names were provided. The city concurred with the names that were offered, as well as the
Yes,
city
yes.
concurred with the names that were offered.
And those names were
Yeah,
Elude
I
Martinez
would
and
prefer
Esteban
him
Lopez.
myself. If I had to pick, that's who I would pick.
We generally agreed Esteban Lopez as the first choice, and if he wasn't available, then
Then Elude.
the Elude Martinez.
This question is for Maria. Peterson needs work. And so if we have Peterson full, Radnor full, something happens to Peterson, that water will go to Story? Or what do you do with the water that's in Peterson if you need to do repair work on it?
Council Mayor, we are currently working on the Peterson project with the planning and design. Within city funding, we're looking at a roughly five-year project unless we can get some outside funding assistance. When that reservoir comes offline, it will not come offline until Bradner is 100% operational, and we've tested it and we understand the water quality. One of the things about treating water is it could be the exact same water coming off the river into Peterson and going into Bradner, and it's a different quality because of the reservoir itself. So we'll have to understand that water when we're treating it. Once we understand it and we can treat it properly, then we will be able to use the rest of the water in Peterson or transfer the rest of the water in Peterson to be able to take Peterson offline. It does leak, so we do end up, water does end up, it doesn't get wasted, it goes downriver and keeps the river wet and alive. But we are wanting to address that because it is a good amount of water every year.
Does Bradner have the capacity to hold the water that's in Peterson?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Councilor,
So it can hold
Bradner is
everything.
300 acre feet and Peterson is 200 acre
Oh,
feet.
okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Councilor Romero?
City Manager, if I recall, we had asked the attorneys to get us basic where we were with their proposal and our proposal. We haven't received that.
I believe we did, I know Maria did receive some information from the water attorneys.
I believe it was a summary, I'm not sure if it was,
Yeah, but I didn't get that.
you did, okay.
We-
Well,
did you
None
guys
of
get-
us did. We really
Yeah,
do
okay.
need to be in the loop.
Right.
Absolutely. So that was my question, if we could get that information to
Absolutely.
see, what their proposals have been and where we're at.
Absolutely.
I know we kind of got a summary, but we
It-
haven't
it-
gotten too much of a report.
And it was a summary, but we can get it to you. Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, we'll send it out tomorrow.
My next question, Mr. Gonzalez, is, you had mentioned that, under the Marcus administration, that agreement, was pretty good. What's the difference then versus now? I mean, if you could kind of outline.
Actually, Councilman Romero, that's an excellent question. When we first started designing the sharing agreement, it was based on what we knew on the ground by observation. And so we came up and we said, okay, well, how much do the acequias need to fill the acequias? Okay, we came up with 15 CFS. The numbers are pretty much the same. They haven't changed. What has changed is the number of days of the rotation. It used to be 7. It was 7 days on, 7 days off for the city. We changed that because we felt the rotation was too long to wait for water from an agricultural standpoint, so we changed it to 3 days. And so we modified that, now we're in a 3 days on, 3 days off. And so that provides unless the new one has put it back
It's
on
the
a
same.
7.
To clarify, it's 7 days on, 7 days off for the acequias. The city are 3 days on. The city is 3 days on. and 3 days
There
off.
you go, yeah. So we made that modification, and we also modified some of the amounts Like, for instance, there's a scale, and you haven't seen the sharing agreement. Unfortunately, I didn't make a copy to provide to you of the sharing schedule. I do have, it's in draft form, and you should take a look at it and also give us your input, because it would be great if we could go together, like I said, to the state engineer and say, hey, this is something that we want as a community. But it's 3 days on, 3 days off, schedule for the city of Las Vegas on a 7-day rotation. And so that was one of the things that changed. There's also some people on this rotation, or some acequias on this rotation, that aren't members of this association, but do share water with us as part of this rotation schedule. We have no problem with that. We don't ask for additional water to take care of the additional acequias. The way these acequias were constructed is quite an engineering feat, because an acequia will take water up here on top, it'll irrigate all its fields here, and then release water back into the river. Most of the time, the next acequia is below this point where the water's released back into the river. So they do like a leapfrog, if you will. One uses, then the other one, and so forth. And so basically they're using some of the same water over and over again because of return flows. Unfortunately, when we built the city's diversion up on the canyon up there, and that system does not provide return flow to the Gallinas except at the sewer treatment plant on the south end of town. And so it skips the 6 or so acequias here in the middle part of the basin. They're the ones that really are the guys behind this sharing agreement. Us downstream, we rely on storm events, effluent water that is released by the city, any water that may come through the river, but we're basically downstream. We're dependent on what you guys put back into the river. And even that, in today's world, has begun to change, because we're seeing to see a 1 to 2 CFS fluctuation on a daily basis as we fill and refill effluent storage facilities here in Vegas. In other words, when I start irrigating Lourdes at 10 in the morning with 5 CFS or 4 CFS, at 2 o'clock I'm irrigating with 2 CFS, so I'm not very efficient, because we're filling all the storage facilities here in town. At 10 o'clock, that flow returns back to 5 CFS. The next day it does the same thing. So if you look at the gauges, you're seeing a spiking event constantly on the river. Perhaps that's something for our discussions also, to engage in the discussion, because we don't want the river to dry up on us down in Lourdes. I mean, that's what we rely on.
The city does have a required return flow to the river, and we've exceeded it. We've never come close to even our minimum requirement.
And the other question, as far as acequia users versus 98 versus today, is it increased or decreased? The amount of acequia
Well, that's a great question, because if you go back and look at history, okay, in 1833 or 1933, there is what was called the Hope Decree. Okay, the Hope Decree was a federal adjudication of the entire PECO system, including the Gallinas. Okay, so the federal government came here in 1933, and they adjudicated everybody's water rights. And they determined how much the city owned, how much the acequias owned. Unfortunately, the acequias, or the city, did not participate in the 1933 adjudication. And so in 1956 is the first time that this claim by the city surfaced. They had an opportunity in 33. They never, in 1933, they weren't parties to it. But at that time, from the headwaters to Allende, La Concepcion, and Nandian to Los Torres, there was almost 14,000 acres of irrigated land on the Gallinas River. Today, there's less than 4,000 acres of acequia irrigated land. That's what the cost of this litigation has been to this community, has been. We lost a heck of a lot of water rights because, number one, our community didn't see the importance of acquiring those water rights because we enjoyed a portable water right. We didn't have to worry about buying water rights. We took as much as we wanted, we used as much as we wanted without regard to the agricultural community. People quit farming. The adjudication came in 1991. The state engineer, at that time, D.L. Sanders, your own attorney, was the head of that division. They walked into Las Vegas and they told people on this river, you haven't used your water in 20 plus years, 15 years. You no longer have a water right. It's been retired. It now belongs to the state of New Mexico. Just imagine what we lost. We lost a heck of a lot of water rights that could have better been used and serviced in this community. We wouldn't have to worry about acquiring water rights. We would have had plenty. In fact, back in 1996, under the Martinez administration, we approached that administration with the idea to join us in the fight against the state engineer to not retire all these water rights. And the response from council and mayor at that time were, we're not going to support you because that means there's more water rights that need water. And so consequently, when this adjudication came and to its end, it had no pity on the people that didn't use the water. I myself lost an acre of water rights because the river changed course. This happened that way. Our agricultural community that we had here in Las Vegas, at one time we were growing 100 crates of iceberg lettuce out at the storage project. Today we basically grow hay and pasture and very few gardens. There's a few orchards. I have an orchard. There's some people that are still doing gardens. But we went from a major agricultural community providing and feeding thousands of people on the Santa Fe Trail initially, and later on through our development, to an agricultural community now that is on the very verge of collapsing. Because if you look behind you, look at the age of all these commissioners. They're old. I'm old.
Thank you.
The average age of a farmer in San Miguel County is 62 years old. Okay? We need a new cadre of farmers to come and take our places. And I think we have that in place in this community. We have the elementary schools have greenhouses for the kids to learn. Luna Community College has an agricultural program. Highlands just got funded for a big forestry program. And so let's mold this community and make it back to where it was in its glory days when it was an agricultural community. I mean, there's no reason why we can't. Our farmers markets are growing. People are asking for local. Thank you.
One more.
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to ask you, because the judge has given a March,
Sometime
extension,
first week.
sometime in March, is there a possibility that we might be able to meet again with the Acequia folks to work out a water sharing plan that we might be able, and I say we together, could present to the judge in March and to the arbitrators?
If I might,
I think-
Mayor, Councilors, one of the things that was stated by the state engineer and the water master who's been tasked with managing the river is that they won't, the judge won't dictate to them how to manage the river, and they're going to be the deciding party on how to, because that's already been delegated to or tasked to the water master. When we've discussed some things before, they were in the meetings, and there were some areas where they weren't willing to. And so the state engineer has a big part in how the river is managed.
Okay, so what you're saying is, no, we can't, they're gonna do it for us.
I think there's a discussion that can always be had. At the same time, the state engineer, water master will not be dictated to on how he will manage the river.
Councilman.
I mean, we are the governing body, and I think if it's the wishes of the council, the governing body, that we have this meeting with the Acequias, we can do it.
Yeah.
And then we can address the state engineer of what the results of the meeting would be. And
Mayor, if I could, what Maria mentioned here is kind of a thing the state engineer said. The state engineer, at one point, the Acequias were asking for this sharing agreement to be memorialized in the court system. The state engineer felt that if the court administered this sharing agreement, that was taking away from the authority of the state engineer. So they were very resistant to the court still having oversight on the sharing agreement, okay? I can tell you that there are sharing agreements that I've worked on myself on one of them, and another one that existed for many years, that we can go back to the state engineer if that's the concern. There is an agreement between a ditch up in Cuba. It's an organization composed of 8 community ditches under one commission that diverts water from the Jemez River from San Gregorio Reservoir. They do it on a trans-mountain diversion, and they divert water into the Rio Puerco on the Cuba side rather than it coming down the Rio Grande on this side. That agreement was negotiated in the 1990s between the Pueblos and the Nacimiento Ditch Agreement. It was memorialized in court as an agreed thing that is recognized by the state and administered in that fashion. There is another agreement that is much older than that. That was, I would imagine it came to be in the 1950s with the drought. This agreement that I'm referring to is a ditch in Anton Chico. There are 2 ditches. There's one that is called the Vado de Juan Pais on one side of the river, and the other one is called the Anton Chico ditch, I believe is what it is, or Tecolote ditch. But those 2 ditches got into a fight over water. They share the same diversion. They also wound up in court, and they also entered into an agreement as to how they were going to share water, and that's how they resolved their litigation. So it's not something that is new to the state engineer. The state engineer is resistant to have the oversight of the court monitoring what they're doing. That's what the resistance is.
Isn't there also other people on the river that this water master is responsible for?
Sure. Yeah. So, I think when we get to that bridge, certainly, Mayor, that's certainly something we can approach the state with.
So I think what I've heard is that what Councilor Ulibarri would like to still consult with the attorneys in regards to what we heard here. And also with Councilor Casey, that we would really like to consider having this meeting with the Acequia Association. And do you have a comment on that?
No, me personally, I think if we could try to negotiate without an attorney, I know that Councilor Ulibarri wants some guidance, but I think if we could, some of the issues that we might agree on, if we could at least start a basis and go from the foundation and we go from there, then at that point when we need those.
Bring the attorneys when we feel like we
Right.
need them at that
Or
point.
if there comes a point where we don't get along,
So I know that the inception of Las Vegas came from the agricultural community in regards to all the farmers that grew their products near the river. And I think it's, judging from the farmers markets that I've attended and gone through, it's amazing how much wonderful the products that they're bringing to us in this community. And that's grown from the grounds that is close to the Acequias and the rivers. I think that's part of this culture of this community, and we cannot lose that. And I also feel that communication with Comity is very important, with respect for each other, to respect of what you are doing and what we are doing. We need to understand each other in that respect. And I believe that a solution can be worked out. So what I think, from what I heard, we will consult with our attorney from what the discussion that's here, and we will hopefully get the date from the
Judge Westler?
Judge Westler.
Yes.
Yes, the judge, for the mediators. And I'm looking forward, and I'm sure the council is going to be looking forward in the discussions with, the negotiations with you us. So, I would like to thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Point of clarification, so are we gonna sit down with them prior, or we're gonna wait for the negotiation, the mediator?
I think the first step is to get the attorneys, to let them know what we heard. Okay? And if that's not the wishes of the council, then we won't do that. But that's what I'm thinking. And once we give the information to the attorneys, and they're, I'm sure, are going to give us guidance from that conversation, then I think we need to have the meeting with the SACS.
Because I think the attorneys, I mean, I think the attorneys at this point know where they stand right now, and what their expectations are.
Okay? So that's fine. I mean, if the wishes of the council is to meet with them first, or meet with them right away, then that's what we'll do.
Okay, I guess we get info from everybody, but I think maybe you set two, I mean, maybe the mayor and Councilor Casey, or not, or, two individuals. And
But that's the other, yeah, that's the question I had. If we meet with the SACS, and if it's the governing body, then we'd have to have it at an open meeting, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And would that be a good thing? I think so.
I think so, because I don't feel comfortable meeting with just, two of us and
Mhm.
two of the Asika folks, because everybody else is left out.
Right.
I think everybody has to be in on the conversation. They have to listen to what other people are saying, and then together we can come up with, whatever it is that we want to be able to present to our individual attorneys, and then to the judge at some point, or to the mediator, whoever that happens to be.
Is it legal to have negotiations in open meeting?
Well, we're not negotiating, I think we're just talking.
I'm just asking.
I believe one other issue that we have to be concerned with is with the mediator that is probably being assigned at this time. They've already offered the mediator, so, Maria?
And, Manager, I could follow up with the attorney tomorrow and see if they can push the judge's staff to see if there's an answer to the mediator question, so the
Mhm.
council has that
Yes,
question as well.
so that you have that information in front of you as well.
Okay.
And that when a conversation does happen between the council and the staff and the Ezekias, that we do at least have all the technical knowledge here to be able to answer any questions and provide all the information on
Okay.
on the river.
Are we all in consensus here for what we're going to do?
I think so.
Councilor Romero?
Fine. Fine.
Okay. But we want to thank you very much for coming and speaking to us, and we did listen. Okay?
Thank you.
It's not just we just didn't hear you, we listened. Thank you. All right. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Madam Manager, what's next on the agenda?
The next item is going back to item number 1, business item, approval, disapproval of resolution 20-05.
Mr. Mayor,
Do we have-
I move that we remove item number 1, resolution number 20-05 off the table and make it the next order of business.
Okay, I need a motion and second, please.
Second.
Okay, motion and second, roll call?
Counselor Ulibarri Jr.?
Yes.
Counselor Romero?
Yes.
Counselor Casey?
Yes.
Have a motion by Counselor Casey, a second by Counselor Romero. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you. And now, Madam Attorney, do we have the documents?
I do have some documents. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, in light of our previous discussion, I incorporated those changes into the document that's being passed around. If you'll note in the first paragraph, we included, or made the correction, annual contributions contract, added the R there, to ineligible buyers in the year 2004 in violation of HUD requirements. We added an entire second whereas. Council Romero, you had a concern about that second Whereas the city and HUD entered into a repayment agreement in February 2016 for the diverted sale proceeds in the amount of $611,082, of which a balance in the amount of $90,425 will remain as of June 30th, 2020. And made another change in the next paragraph, once again, plus the remaining amount of $90,425, so there's no question what the remaining amount is. In the second to the last, or the last whereas paragraph, we changed that to whereas the city recognizes that the amounts repaid are considered federal funds. We changed that from the previous, the city must recognize. And I believe that incorporates all the changes that were requested.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Any questions? Councilwoman? Nope.
Mr. Mayor, I
Need a
move
motion?
approval of the amended resolution 2005 that incorporates all of the changes that we discussed earlier.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more discussions? Any more discussion? No? Roll call, please.
Counselor Romero?
Yes.
Counselor Casey?
Yes.
Counselor Ulivari Jr.?
Yes.
I have a motion by Counselor Casey, a second by Counselor Ulivari Jr. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager, what's next on the agenda?
The next item on the agenda is executive session. I don't have any issues, but I don't know.
Okay, councilors, is there any need for executive session?
I think if we do have any, we'll save them for the regular meeting next week or week after.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No? Everybody? Need a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second. Roll call?
Counselor Ulivari Jr.?
Yes, ma'am.
Counselor Romero? Counselor Casey?
Yes.
I have a motion by Counselor Casey, a second by Counselor Ulivari Jr. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Motion carries.
Thank you. Meeting